lost a few of our number already. A few people told me they couldn't make it for various reasons, so that's totally fine. And again, email's nice, but not necessary. But come as you can. And are people getting my emails? Is that good? I know a lot of people were approaching me about it not getting the email, but that it went directly to spam. So if you're in that category, check your spam, and then whatever you have to do to enable my email, genjo@buddhaeye.org. So that's good. And what else? Let's start in with the homework. So were people kind of cogitating on the wheel of life this past week? Anyone have any narratives they want to share, or just any insights or frustrations or confusions? Or just general appreciation or confusion you'd like to come forward with? And if folks online, if you remember, we can hear you, so go ahead and unmute yourself and jump on in, and so we'll sort of navigate any traffic jams as they appear. Dawn?
I'll share something I noticed about myself, not for the first time this week. I have a tendency to subscribe the states of mind to other people, which is probably not exactly how it's intended to be used, but it's really easy to have an encounter with someone and then think to yourself, yeah, that guy's really in the God realm, that kind of thing. So caught myself doing that a few times.
Did it feel helpful at all, or did it feel kind of more judgy?
Oh no, it's
At either times, yeah.
I'm judging myself, but it's helpful because I realize that I'm just projecting, which is not useful. But yeah, it's not the first time I've noticed I do that. So
Yeah.
just raising it.
Totally. At times I find it super helpful when I'll feel like oftentimes driving around and someone kind of cuts me off or something like that, and first a spark of anger, and it's like, oh, that's a very sad Ashuric being. Like there's Ashura power trying to be first, energy going on there, and it helps me remember that that's connected to suffering. That's one way I really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. Anyone else? Nancy?
You said the link about the wheel of life, and I really enjoyed that.
The one where it's sort of detailed,
it really detailed it out, and I don't know a lot about it, so it was just nice to revisit all that. Yeah.
What's one thing that struck you?
The guy holding the wheel.
Yama.
Yeah. It was nice to sort of get a little more understanding about his fearsomeness. And I didn't think his head looked like an ox.
Oh, is that one of the things? I didn't exactly read that. Yeah.
Like he was a monk in a cave for 49 years. No, he wanted to be there for 50 years because he thought he would become enlightened. So at 49 and 11 months, some robbers came and they had stolen an ox. And they cut its head off, and then they realized he was there. And so they cut his head off, and then he put the ox head on. Anyway, it gets weirder from there.
Oh, wild. I definitely didn't read that. Yeah. The one new thing I learned about Yama is oftentimes he'll be shown wearing or on top of a tiger skin. And it said, and that has something to do with his fearsomeness or something like that. So I think tigers, are the most ferocious creatures that you could probably encounter at that time. And so even the most ferocious things fall to time and life and such. Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, Bill?
I think I had kind of a similar idea of encountering kind of other people's karmas, or sort of interpreting other people's realms on the wheel, but then kind of coming back to we're all connected and turning, and so it was kind of relieving to find that judgment and then kind of bring it back to a unification and suffering.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to piece that together and bring it together after feeling maybe a lot of years of sort of aversion to certain kinds of karma. And being like, well, my suffering's over here, and I like these people to suffer with. We all suffer similarly, but these people who suffer in this way, it's kind of hard for me. But just sort of seeing how that's connected was very soothing in accepting that and being like, I still might want to suffer in my own way and with my own people, but there's really not much difference. It's just kind of a different angle.
Yeah. Would you be willing to share some of the people's suffering who their suffering like rubs you the wrong way, rubs your suffering the wrong way?
Assurance for sure. I just am completely avoidant of confrontation and yelling and anger, and I feel like I encountered a lot externally and like in myself. I'm like, I don't know where that anger is. I know that I have it and I know that it's natural, but I don't want to point it at people. And so when I see other people pointing their anger at themselves or at other people, it's really hard for me to be near. But it's an incredibly big part of the human experience.
Totally.
And it's an expression of suffering.
Yeah. And then what gets me so often there is, especially when I don't like it externally, almost always it means it's probably the realm of suffering that I tend to repress in myself. That's the thing that's like, oh yeah, I'm not someone who does that. Well, almost certainly you hang out there sometimes, and then you choose to find other ways to divert your attentiveness to it. Yeah, at least that's my experience. Thanks, Bill. Do you think we could draw out someone online? It's like, Ray, are you reaching for your... Yeah.
Yeah, I was reaching for my unmute, so are you able to hear me? Well, first of all, I'll say it's a little weird sitting in my living room trying to talk to all of you when I can only see Genjo. But one of the things I found helpful, and I think I mentioned this to you in my email, my first encounter with the Wheel of Life came from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where it was a very concrete thing. These are realms that you're reborn into depending on your karma, your past karma. And I found it really helpful when you explained that this could be in a more metaphorical sense or considered states of mind. And maybe it's just my Western mindset, but that made it a lot more palatable to me, and it just made a lot more sense to me that way.
Thanks, Ray. While I have you, is there one realm that's been particularly ripe in your imagination or helping you understand your own, I don't know, life process, your own heart? Anything in there?
Well, yeah, I think they all do to a certain extent. I've passed through all of them, and I think sometimes I pass through several of them in a day very easily, and it does help to kind of recognize that. I'm in healthcare, and other people in similar professions, or anybody that deals with the public, you can recognize that things change very quickly depending on your interaction with one person to the next. And seeing several people one-on-one in a row very quickly, you very quickly glimpse all of these 6 realms within a short time span.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Ray.
Sure.
Yeah, that bringing this into the psychological realm. I wonder if people were just imagining a fiction here. If people from the Buddha's time were trying to imagine our life as human beings, in our century, in our time and place, and they're trying to understand our psychological words, right? That this was the dominant mode of psychology, we could say, at that time. And so I find it really useful to remember that our own terms and our own language is a kind of heuristic to understand ineffable human experience, right? At least it has shapes and contours, right, that we're trying to bring further into our awareness. And stepping into different logics and different imageries therein is so helpful, and to step back from our own literalism, I think is really useful. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Interestingly, I found myself identifying a lot with that second ring from the center, which I don't know, did we give that a name last time? I don't recall.
No, I still haven't seen many good resources on it, but I think what it really represents is the flow.
Yeah,
It talks about the flow of all these and going down and from one into the other, marking the lower realms with the dark or tainted karma, and this as the bright karma right here in the rising.
Yeah, it's really the dynamism and the fact that I go in cycles on certain things. Very, very well understood, the frustrating cycles that do pass through very much. The fact you kind of get stuck in one realm and realize, oh yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. Then you immediately, or not immediately, but eventually progress on to another one, and the dark and light aspect also.
Yeah, for me that too feels really alive for me right now. Particularly, it's so useful to get sharper and sharper about those narratives in our own head. So for me, watching where I feel it's all going groovy, and then I have this kind of unlimited projection into the future of things being groovy, and then all of a sudden they're not anymore, and my wheels are turning, and I can't just like rebalance and being like, oh, the art I was going to do tonight, or the studying I was going to do tonight with my boundless energy, it's not here anymore. I need to actually recalibrate, versus I'll just like kind of spin my wheels and not realize that I'm just in a different place, and it'll lead to this kind of like crashing and burning in this certain way. Is there a narrative that you'd be willing to share about the relationships between the realms that you're finding illuminated through this?
I always identify most with the Hungry Ghost realm, just in general, and so it's similar to, I guess there's an aspect of mindfulness to it where I'll catch myself being stuck in one of my narratives, say in the Hungry Ghost realm, and then try to pull back from that and say, okay, I don't use the term Hungry Ghost most of the time, but then maybe I'll shift back to the human realm, and now feel a spike of anger from something, and I figure I'm down in the animal realm, and then notice that, and then maybe shift back up to the human realm, just kind of be bouncing around based on that frame of mind and being.
Oh, thank you. James, are you going to jump in there?
I looked at a couple of resources regarding different pieces of the imagery, and that second ring from the center, in some of them that I saw, there's a bodhisattva at the top on one side and then a demon at the top on the other, and it's supposed to represent, at least in some instances, that I think that the bodhisattva is providing guidance to people in one aspect, and how to improve things, and then you've got the demon on the other side going, no, go eat all the candy, go eat all the candy.
Tempting.
Yes. And so you have this, you're rising up on one side, but on the other side falling back down again.
And a couple of the images also have chariots, so that you're being like driven or like pulled along by those beings as well. It's interesting. There's all sorts of different, so the Tibetan versions tend to be different from the South Asian Buddhism ones, and so fun about mythology and myth and images is that they are, the edges are not defined. It's quite fun, yeah, and frustrating at times, but I think mostly fun. Well, maybe we'll do a quick, does anyone have anything else they want to share? If anyone was just working up to that platform, or anyone? One more? Can we fish out one more? Nancy, you want to give back in?
Well,
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting because all the realms communicate with one another. And I don't know, it just made sense to me.
Can you say more?
Well, the hungry ghost thing, I feel like that's sort of embedded in our culture almost, with, grasping and wanting more and bigger is better kind of thing. So I related a lot to that.
Yeah, the image where you see even lovers or good friends out in a beautiful restaurant looking through their phone. You ever see that? And sorry if you might be one of these people at some times. That's easy for me. I don't tend to do that, so it's easy for me to see that. But there's an itch. You have all this lavish wonder in front of you, and yet there's something driving this extra oomph. Yeah, I think if there is a quality of our age, the amount of addiction, small, large, medium, in all these different ways it flows through our culture, I mean, it's quite profoundly terrifying in many ways. Okay. I guess we'll do a quick review of what we touched on yesterday, and last class we had so many excellent questions that really furthered the dialogue, so feel free to jump in if you see something you'd like to chase down a little bit. So we started talking about the 3 marks of existence last class, right? So this anicca, anatta, and dukkha. And I was struck, I didn't quite, I think, elaborate this fully last time, but the 3 marks of existence. So really, these things appear or are totally active when we try and pin something down, when we try and say something exists. So in my head, I sort of called them the 3 like grindings of existence, the 3 flames of existence. I think it helped me bring these fundamental pieces of experience into my gut in a different way, that when we try and say anything can stay put, they're acted upon by the impermanence and no self. And we could think of those as kind of fundamental unstableness, and that anicca, or impermanence, works over time and lends towards the external, that over time, everything will move and change. And anatta, or no self, which also sort of more specifically means no enduring self-nature, no static self-sameness, is related to space and kind of innate being. And this dukkha, which we only touched on more briefly than the rest, this suffering, this anxiousness, this dis-ease, or unsatisfactoriness. There's no good translation for it, so many Buddhist communities will keep with the word dukkha to allow us to enter in further to that word. It's always commented on that unsatisfactoriness is a very unsatisfactory term. I prefer anxiousness these days and dis-ease when I think of that word, that no matter, even in very delightful experiences, often there's this small anxious wheel that says, can I keep this going, right? Or what will happen if I lose it? Or you feel like, oh, it's not quite there anymore. Has anyone ever had that in meditation practice? You show hands and look around so we feel like we're not alone. Great. Yeah, right? It's like, ooh, I did the thing. And how often is that just right? That's the moment you've lost it. When you're like, I've got it. How could I keep it going? It's the recipe for losing it. Because you've just entered the place where you've surrendered it. That the surrender happens to link up perfectly with the rising of that bliss, that kind of ease we can find in our life. And then subtly, we want to concretize that, right? So in one sense, I think that has to be the path, sort of a little aside, that you're not doing it wrong if that's happening. That I think that is just an endless exploration of life and meditation, that we get to a place where we've put forth and offered, we've surrendered our clinging and our ability to control. The good stuff arises, and we say, yes, I've got it. We try and claim the booty, and you lose it. And that will happen for countless lifetimes, endlessly, on more and more subtle layers. It'll get better and better and better, and you'll keep trying to grasp it, and you'll learn from that. You'll learn from it. So, this anicca, anatta, and dukkha, suffering, anxiousness, and dis-ease. So, what does this dukkha look like? Ta-da! This is what dukkha looks like. It looks like these 6 realms. I think that's one I find a very exciting and interesting way to think about dukkha. Not just pain, not just something that's uncomfortable, but these are all one way we could think of each of the realms of these are modalities of dukkaying, of duking. These are the places of duking. These are the forms it comes out, it manifests as. And not they're separate and they're connected, as we've been talking about, and they flow through each other pretty much endlessly. And it's obvious to see that this is the place that in one sense hinges it all together. This heavenly realm is a place we're mostly trying to get to. This is the place we want to be, and all of our efforts are trying to get us up into this place. And something further we find in our experience, and it's reflected in practice and understanding of how to unfold awakening in a life, in a Buddhist sense, that these top three realms and these bottom three realms are distinguished from each other. These are the fortunate realms of rebirth, and these are the not so fortunate realms of rebirth. And so in these upper realms, we actually do have more stability, more agency, more ability to choose and navigate our life. And so although they are all, modalities of dukkha, that they're all driven by some amount of anxiousness, they're not all created equal in that these are the more fortunate places. I was reading today in a sutra that somewhere it was said that the wisest of gods wish to be reborn as humans so that they can practice the Dharma better. So that's right. We were talking about that the human realm is really the most fortunate realm. It's not the most pleasurable realm. That's the heavenly gods realm. But it is the place where there's the right balance of pain and pleasure. And the human realm is characterized by practicality. And so we can see that on one hand, it's the trap of human life. We try and make everything okay. We do the good stuff, and we finish our to-do lists, and we pay our bills. You get everything in order, and that can be exactly the trap of life. We think that we can stabilize or kind of conquer the dukkha, the impermanence, and the no-self by getting things in order. But if we take that idea of practicality to a more subtle level, then practice becomes apparent. If you can bring suffering into your consciousness and become more aware of dukkha and anicca and anatta, then your practical mind turns on, and what do? You practice the Dharma. That's the idealized version, but I believe it's true. So the lower realms, again, there's much less you can do in terms of awakening or realizing the nature of these three marks of existence. Mostly it's getting through. That in fact, really the best, almost the only and best thing it seems like you can do when you're in the hell realms is to just literally be ground apart by the sufferings and flames of the hell realms. You just sort of tie a rope and hang on. And for a while I was like, oh man, all this hell imagery of being hacked to bits and burning. Another way we can think about that is we've concretized so hard on our ideas of who we are that really just anatta and anicca themselves are breaking our consciousness apart. It's the most unrefined dukkaying because there's no element of we've tied ourselves into a knot that's so firm that it requires that kind of rending in order to become free of those ideas and fixations. And a couple things I didn't mention last class, and then we'll wrap up talking about the wheel, is there's another image of these three center beings, the cock, the snake, and the pig representing greed, the cock, the pig is delusion, the cock is greed, and the snake is hate. And other versions have the ignorance, the pig, holding both of them in either hands, or they're both being held in the pig's mouth. So we can see one way we can image them is that they're all moving and chasing each other kind of more cyclically, or we can also say that both greed and hate arise from ignorance or delusion. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the outer ring. We didn't touch upon this at all. So these 12 images represent the 12-link chain of dependent origination. I did have to practice saying that. The 12-link chain of dependent origination. So this, what to say about that? This is quite a detailed psychology of moment to moment arising of phenomena and flow of our karma. So I haven't taken the notes here, but many of the objects of our experience come to us from our past karma. There's nothing we can do about, let's say, the arising of, I see a brownie, and the arising of greed right there. In one sense, we might guilt ourselves and say, man, you're always so greedy, like, why you gotta do that? I think in a more refined Buddhist sense, we would say, or in this analysis, that is based on my past karma. So because I've done that hundreds of thousands of millions of times in the past, that's a well-worn neural pathway, that brownie equals deliciousness, and I like that, and I get all sorts of chocolate happy feelings from that just arises in me. So it is called, I think it's called the past or the cause of the present. So we just receive that as our experience. And then there's a moment where we can choose, and this is called the present cause. So that in the moment of receiving my own heart and my own intention, I can choose to act and fuel that karma further, or I could renounce that. I could say, oh, that's not the way I want to move in the world. And that affects my next rebirth, moment by moment by moment by moment. So the real key link in this chain comes between craving and grasping. Here, we'll go around them real quickly and get the full ring first, and then I guess I'll dive into that specific spot. So at the top we have ignorance here, and I believe this is a blind person walking. Other images show sometimes a blind person leading a camel. So right, the images of lostness, confusion, not really knowing where you're going. Next, that predisposition is how the Zen Roots books talks about that place in the link. It's also called formations. And there's a potter right there. So there's so many preconceived ideas about reality that totally characterize everything that appears after that. The vessel is set, you could say in a way, based on our past ignorance. Then the vessel appears for all the rest of the aspects of the phenomena that will appear. Following that are consciousness, name and form, 6 sense organs, and contact. So I believe we have a monkey here picking fruit, and then I guess that goes from consciousness of a separate self. I don't entirely get this imagery. I think I get more. There's an imagery where a monkey's jumping from tree to tree, and the past tree has died, and he's in a new tree with fruit there. So there's a relationship there between continuity and difference. Same monkey, different tree. So there's kind of this feeling of next happening. Name and form, I believe, has to do with the 5 aggregates. These are the lumps of stuffness that make up a human mind. Form, sensation, perceptions, and formations. So we chant this every day, every Sunday in the Heart Sutra. No form. Actually, how does that go? Form, sensation, perceptions, formations. And consciousness, there it is. That's where I'm getting lost. So now the boat is set, it's going downstream. The boat is one of those, I believe it's consciousness. And the 4 others are the 4 aggregates of those lumps of human experience. So you can get the feel that this is all, it's almost like everything's already on the track, is the kind of feeling there. People in the boat, monkey jumping to the next tree, the pot is being already set. Then after there we have the house with the 6 windows, or the 6 sense organs. So you can see there's kind of an inside and an outside is appearing strongly in there. You can see through the windows, but there's a definite gap there. After that, we have lovers embracing with sensation. So you can work out that imagery on your own. And then contact. This is so intense. An arrow piercing someone's eye. Contact. And I wonder here just the lack of luminosity. Your whole being is caught in objectness, and there's no sense of distance from you and whatever is there. There's just total touching. You can see how it's ripe for grasping or identifying with an object through that image. After that is craving. I think it's a man being poured alcohol and drinking. Does anyone know any other images for that one, or does it always have to do with alcohol? Anyone who studied those? And here it says attachment to external objects. So I guess, really enjoying the stimulation and watching how it changes your heart, your mind, the intoxication of substances of the world. So grasping here is shown as a man picking fruit, and his basket is already full. And yet continuing to pick fruit. And that's grasping. And then becoming is future birth. So the man and woman in embrace. Birth, someone's giving birth. A woman is giving birth to a child. And then old age and death are there up next with. I'm not sure what's going on there. Is someone carrying a body? People looking at it? It's either rocks or a body.
Yeah, it looks like a body for a funeral.
Yeah, the funeral pyre right there. And then said to begin all over again at that point. So that's a really, you can study that more in detail. We won't spend too much time on it there. It's really amazing to spend time and be thinking about those. And there are many meditative schools and practices which will have you look and pay attention to these. Actually, I remember the most clear moment for me. I was a nanny for a family for 4 boys. They were ages 3, 6, 7, and 7. And it was always the hardest part of my day where I had to wake the 3-year-old up for a nap. And he was never happy about it. And I remember one day I had woken him up a little late and was like, okay, we really got to get moving. And I just saw him wake up and feel his deep frustration at the situation. And I just saw him looking around. He's like, I want something. I don't know what it is, but I want. And so he just said, banana. Like, I want a banana. I was like, Tannen, no, you're not getting banana. We're getting in the car. And, he just lost it. And he needed that banana to get through, basically. And I was just marveling at how, actually, I think our consciousness really does this all the time. And I think of, in particular, just really at the beginning with ignorance. You just wake up in the morning, you open your eyes and say, you just kind of I don't know what it is, but for me, it's I close my eyes and I just lean out into the world. What do I have to do? What's going on? How do I find my own sense of being through the external world? We rely on the outside rather than something more like internal centering happening. And you can see that happening in various places all over this leaning into the external that is primary to this whole turning. And so the really important place for Buddhist practice is between craving and grasping. Craving and grasping. So this is the place where reflection and renunciation are totally central to breaking the turning of this wheel. So you have the moment of, I want banana. And at some point, you may be able to say, do I really want a banana? Will the banana make me feel better? It might for a little bit, but is it really scratching the itch? So this place of and also that's where this word renunciation comes from. And so when we think about meditation practice, if you sit down, find some stability, and then watch the endless beings parade through your heart and mind, imaging what they would like to happen to make life okay or interesting, or what needs to go away, what needs to appear. And directly, without doing anything, we are accomplishing that breaking between craving and grasping. Is this making sense? Is this connecting? So that's why I think many times we can go to a Buddhist place of practice, and there can be this great trust in meditation practice. It's like, oh, you haven't done it before? Okay, great. Sit down for 40 minutes. You'll be fine. And really, there's a trust that even if you are pouring a lot of energy into these realms, whichever one you're in, and you're churning those mind states forward and not even relinquishing very much, actually, you're not moving. Maybe you are. Maybe you're moving quite a bit, but you're not running around grabbing bananas. So there's a difference. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about karma, that there's degrees, there's variations and intensities of karmic action and the results that they cause. So for example, thinking for 40 minutes about eating a banana would have less karmic effect probably than eating a banana. Does that make sense? That there are different degrees, and maybe if your whole life you've been eating that banana at 3 o'clock when you wake up from your nap, and you're interested in not eating the banana anymore, you might have to think about the banana for years. And then finally, maybe you can release the thought of banana, right? So kind of a silly example, but we can see it might relate to all sorts of parts of our lives. Any questions about that? I just spoke a lot and quite a bit fairly technical. Yeah, Matt.
I have a thought and a question. The thought is about like how there's no real absolute nature maybe to these things, like how perspective can shift with time of like, oh, I thought I was in hell at that point in my life, but comparatively now I was in heaven. Does that like kind of thinking apply to what this is trying to teach me?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
like there's been times where I thought, oh, that was really heaven, and then I look back and I think, no, I was actually like a hungry ghost at that time, yearning for something, or that time was awful, but now I can look back and think about, oh, that was really, really great.
Yeah, totally. Or you
like,
think
I can see how sometimes it's like absolute, but also, I don't know, I'm thinking about how my perspective on things shifts and what realm I was in, what I thought at the time doesn't feel like now or something.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a part of it. And in fact, that was used, there's a famous story about, or there's a story about the Buddha, I think it was his younger brother or his younger cousin, tricking him into becoming a monk, or skillful meaning him into becoming a monk. So he was really attached to his wife and loved her, I know, crazy. And the Buddha was very interested in having Nanda become a monk. And he was like, Nanda, you don't realize how splendid the heavenly realms are. And in doing practice as a bhikkhu, you can encounter these delights that far surpass your wife. So it's really, I mean, so very crude. I don't really appreciate it very much, the story. But I think that method is talked about, that if you think certain kinds of pleasurable states are good, see what else is possible in the realm of experience. It feels very much a part of the discourse, and at least more ancient Buddhism, about how this wheel could help us like realize the fullness and possibilities of human living. Which kind of in a similar realm. Were you going to say something else?
Oh, just the question that I had is, do you know why it's like capped at 3? Like is emptiness and nirvana also marks of existence, or how come the teaching is?
Well done. That was going to be a little bit of a reveal in a bit. That sometimes it's talked about as the 3 marks of existence, and I think Thich Nhat Hanh in particular favors the 4 marks of existence, and nirvana is one of them. And it's nirvana is tranquil. And again, it basically that dukkha and all of those, well, it's the 4th aspect, that it's always active in the existence of anything. And even if those 3 are sort of burning intensely, that tranquil aspect is always present, even if it's not able to be perceived right then. But I think maybe we can bracket that conversation. We'll talk about nirvana more next class, will be the plan. But well incited, sir. Antonia?
I have a question to piggyback off of your first question, and just kind of makes me wonder about, in terms of these different realms, how fixed they can be if we can at one point, or at least I'll always be myself, but I can at one point in time feel like I'm in one realm, and then looking back, be like, oh, maybe that wasn't the case, but at that time, that was the case. And so I guess like trying to like feel out the edges of like where do all these realms actually lie in terms of us and our relation to the world, I guess, at any given point in time.
I guess I would say that they don't lie anywhere, but they lie purely in our experience and imagination and sense of whatever reality is. And so, in a sense, they both have these strokes of quality that we could call true, but they will never, just like the myths themselves, just that there are endless versions of this wheel, so even 10,000-fold in our heart and experience. And that also we're always going to be misunderstanding which place we're in. That'll be a natural part of existence. So actually it's really baked into the Ashura realm more than I ever realized. So I think particularly in many Tibetan versions, there's no wall between them. And actually the wars that are said to happen between them only happen after the Ashuras, it's the leaves of this tree fall, and then they remember that they were tricked or sort of thrown out of the heavenly realms at some point. So there's this kind of natural forgetfulness, and they're like, we're in the heaven realm, and then they're like, wait, the most beautiful tree blooms up in the place we thought we were. We're no longer there. And so I think that sense of displacement is really natural. Yeah, does that get at your question a bit? Yeah. Another thing to add to this, there's also a much more positive sutra which speaks about this wheel of life. And Ananda asked, so the Buddha's closest attendant asked the Buddha, so what arises once ignorance is ended? So another version I've heard, right here, this between craving and grasping, there's a place for release. Also, there's a place right at ignorance for release. In my own understanding, I haven't studied this much, but I think there's a shift in our hearts and practice at times, where there's a place where we're centering on craving and renunciation practice. And then for me in particular, there have been times in meditation practice where it centers more on ignorance and knowing. There's a kind of assuredness in my own being which appears, that it feels a little bit different to me than just hanging out at restraint from craving. So that's a little bracket and also above my pay grade, so take that with a few grains of salt. But Ananda asked the Buddha, what happens when ignorance is cut off? And the Buddha says, faith arises. And he says, and then Ananda says something, and what after faith? He says, gladdening arises. And what after gladdening? Joy. After that, tranquility, bliss, concentration. Then knowledge and vision arise. Disenchantment, dispassion, freedom. And lastly, knowledge to destroy the fetters. So, or the hindrances, the greed, hate, and delusion. So it's a nice positive spin. It feels very refreshing to me that these things arise. So again, I'll read them again in the order that they arise. Faith, gladdening, joy, tranquility, bliss, concentration, and that word is also samadhi, for those of you have heard that, samadhi. Where is it? Knowledge and vision, disenchantment, dispassion, freedom, and knowledge to destroy the fetters. Yeah. I don't have much else to say on that, but it's good news. How many of you experience some amount of pleasure when you're sitting meditation arise? You know, it feels like almost a dirty question, right? We're always like talking about the suffering, but really it's very central. There's a famous, it's so famous, a story of the Buddha remembering as a child he felt pleasure under a rose apple tree. He had been mortifying his body for years and years, trying to like beat himself up into the shape of enlightenment. And he said, oh, like I remember feeling so, I'm not grasping after anything, but I'm simply at ease and joyful in my being. He felt that as a child and remembered that as an image. And he said, maybe that's the way to awakening. And turns out it was, or so we've been told. So sorry, could I see everyone's hands again? And again, we can maybe look around a little bit. Like, okay, pleasure happens. Yeah. Cool, thanks for indulging me there. So would you all like to hear a few more stories of the 6 realms? Maybe nods? Okay, we have a little bit of time, maybe just a couple. I find that they put quite a bit of flesh on the stories for me, or the stories do. The war of the Asuras against the Devas is a perpetual one. It breaks out into active hostilities whenever the Chittapalati tree, oh here it is, flowers and reminds the Asuras of what they have lost. It is, however, a hopeless struggle. The 2 cities of the Devas and of the Asuras are said to be impregnable. When the Asuras are stronger, the Devas flee into their city and close the gates, and even hundreds of thousands of Asuras cannot storm the walls. Likewise, when the Devas are stronger, they cannot force their way into the Asura city. Despite the ferocious appearance and angry nature of the Asuras, these wars are very low in casualties. And then it's a direct quote. However, these battles are not fought with the cutting of skin or hide or the flowing of blood. They fight only like young forest rams do, seeking to raise fear and trembling in their foes. They make war like cowherd boys, beating one another with sticks. That brings so much joy to my heart. Imagine that. So one more I wanted to read, and this is one I mentioned in the last class. A young man lived a life of heedless pleasure, and having wasted his inheritance, he took to armed robbery. Captured by the king's men, he was being led to his execution when a young woman took pity on him and gave him some sweet meats. The venerable Moggallana was nearby, and he knew this man would be reborn in Niraya, hell, Niraya, if he did not make some merit quickly. So, the elder appeared before the man who stood with the sweets in hand. He offered them to the venerable elder bhikkhu. By this act, he would have reappeared in the Deva world, except that as his head was being chopped off, he had a mind of lust toward the young woman. As a result, he took birth as an inferior kind of Deva, a tree spirit, whose abode was a large banyan tree in the jungle. So it's interesting, the classes of devas. So it could be bright, celestial in a palace, or kind of a mongrelly kind of tree spirit situation. So again, so if you're kind of in that tree spirit situation, are you more of an Ashura? You're kind of like hanging out, hiding out, or you're still a deva? There's all sorts of ambiguity in there. Okay. Let us move on to some new material. In just a few minutes that I want to introduce the Four Noble Truths. So I believe in that positive spin on the wheel of life, where it culminates in knowledge of ending the fetters. This is the summation of that knowledge, the Four Noble Truths. It was the first thing the Buddha taught to his 5 ascetic disciplinary friends. He was studying, not really studying, enacting austerities on his body when he decided to take nourishment and go a different path from his friends who were eating very little and not sleeping, and thought that that was the way to wake up. So once he broke rank from them and received a bowl of milk from Sujata, he sat under the Bodhi tree and was said to have attained awakening. And he went and taught his buddies about the Four Noble Truths. Let's see here. Okay. Has everyone seen these before? Anyone not seen them? Yeah, pretty common. Every world religions class will usually touch upon them a little bit. So the first noble truth is that there is dukkha. There's suffering. It's a thing. And again, it's really good it's so easy to hear that word suffering and we just so quickly think pain, right? But actually, we can have all kinds of discomfort actually without dukkha. I'm feeling that very acutely now in the cold weather. Do you have the moments where you walk outside and you recognize, like, I am cold, but you're okay? Right? You're there and you're like, this is kind of uncomfortable. It's not I wouldn't really choose this, but your heart is aligned with it and you're not fighting it. Versus the moments where there's a definite tug and pull, there's a kind of contraction, there's a fear and an anxiety about the cold. So a way we can always be constantly sharpening that idea of what is that suffering. I think a way I think of it often is the unwilling heart. How am I attentive and where am I having an unwilling heart to meet whatever's in front of me? So difficulty versus dukkha. When people ask me about meditation retreat, where we'll sit meditation for 7-8 hours a day and not speak and not do much else, I'll often say there's much difficulty, but not very much suffering. That's now after many years of doing them. So lots of difficulty, less suffering than actually my typical day-to-day existence. That's my experience. The second noble truth, the craving or tanha, and these are the Pali words. The tanha meaning thirst. So craving, and oftentimes grasping is used here. Craving and grasping. And we can think of those as greed, hate, and delusion. The third noble truth, cessation, nibbana, what we call nirvana, often in the Mahayana school, which tends to lean more towards the Sanskrit terms, nirvana. And this has a literal meaning as in to put out a flame, to go out. So really extinguishment is a great word there and a beautiful image. The fire goes out. And lastly, fourth noble truth is marga, which means path. And this points directly to the eightfold path. So right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And that word right really points to a word like correct or true, kind of like almost capital T true. So like authentic might be a synonym that works there. I know it's easy to get tied up around that one, right? Like what is right? But Buddhism is putting forward that there is a right, and it leads to cessation. So this formation, these four tenets right here are organized in what was a classic way to talk about disease and cure for a disease. So that's not a bad circle. That these relate to each other. Oh, that's a bad arrow. That didn't go so well. These cause each other, are related to each other. And these cause each other and are related to each other. So we have the symptom is suffering. Craving is the cause. And then we have the cure, which is nirvana or extinguishment. And path is the cause of that. So symptom, cause, cure, cause. So it's quite logical in that way. These all fit into each other in that way. Anyone have any questions or comments with that?
I have a question, but it's about the right slash correct.
Sure, anything.
I'm wondering how much does that align with the idea of like right in the moral sense? Or I'm sorry, my question isn't fully formed, but I'm wondering if it's like a structure of morality so much as it is like a prescribed kind of list of things.
I think there's overlap, but it's not. It's actually not a lot. I would say that within, and we'll look at this more clearly. We'll spend some time with the Eightfold Path and how that relates actually with a formation of path that we use more commonly in the Mahayana. So the sort of umbrella of philosophy that Soto Zen is located under, which is the 6 perfections. And one of those perfections is ethics. And a number of these, speech, action, and livelihood, those all relate to the ethical realm mostly. So I think in terms of holistically, it points a little bit, I would say, the kind of the flow of anicca and anatta and dukkha. So I think about it a little more metaphysically right there. And that becomes more apparent in, say, view, mindfulness, and concentration. So how is the way that even perception of phenomena accord with the those tenets, those marks of existence? So I'd say that my answer to your question would be that there's some overlap, but it's not completely. So that right is more, I think, in terms of, I don't know, I think of it, I try and shy away from the word metaphysical often, but that there's flows of life that you can be in accord with or out of accord with. So again, like gravity, that you can walk down the stairs or you can fall down the stairs. What do we have there? Yeah, and then in terms of the path is really all about walking down those stairs, and it's about relinquishment. It's about giving over all those places we've concretized, something we want to be true, something we have, something we want to hold on to, things we want to keep away. And so it's relinquishing all of those places. Whereas dukkha is really defined by this craving and trying to keep things put from our self-centered perspective. Joey T?
Ray.
All right.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to throw out there for what it's worth, but one take I heard on the Eightfold Path was rather than the word right, you could interpret it as wise.
Mhm.
So it's wise thinking, wise intention, right? Wise speech, etc.
Yeah, that feels quite a bit more approachable, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks, Ray. Anyone else? Shots? Matt?
This question's bugging me. I don't know if it's actually important. But if the Buddha woke up to being in accord with these streams of life, was he still subject to dukkha? Like, did he still experience craving and suffering?
Yeah, let me think about that. I knew an answer to that at some point. There's a very technical side on that, which is challenging to parse out. He did not create any further suffering, and I don't think he suffered from craving. But he was still subject to receiving his karma, and that made him still have to be turning. He ceaselessly turned this, but it's not that he never received any of this. I believe that's my understanding. There's an example where he had a cousin who was trying to kill him at various times, Devadatta, and Devadatta or some henchman of his rolled a boulder down a hill towards the Buddha, and it sort of caught the Buddha in the foot, and he was bleeding. And all of his disciples were like, "But you're the Buddha, you're completely extinguished." And he says, like, "Correct, I create no further karma. Anything that comes to me, it is brought to cessation in that moment. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't very strong currents that I'm constantly having to receive with my life." And so that's a couple Sundays ago, we celebrated the Buddha's parinirvana, or final nirvana. So the mythological stance there is that his full or complete nirvana happened with the breakup of the body, so that he was no longer tied to any karmic streams whatsoever at that point. That once his body was dispersed, his consciousness was totally freed and no longer even encountered any karma like that, directed at him in a kind of personalistic sense. Yeah, that's a sharp question, and I'm not entirely sure of that answer. So if you're ever around, we should ask Ejo. We should bug him about that. Dawn?
So then maybe I shouldn't do this, but I appreciate Matt's question, and I want to just draw that out a little bit further if I could.
Please, let's
And you can-
chase it. Let's chase it
Okay.
together.
So as long as you inhabit a human body, you're going to experience the need to eat, the need to drink. I mean, I guess I still see those as craving in some way. That's not something as a human you can ever extinguish. So I guess I've never quite figured out how to fold that into the Four Noble Truths, if that's just kind of like
Yeah.
set aside as a given, and that's not exactly what we're talking about, and that's long been my misunderstanding. I've never quite put that together, so I'm throwing it at you.
Yeah, so I think craving and the natural need and sensations that go along with that need to eat are different. So there would be the slight parsing in that so often we call those the same thing.
Right.
The Buddha was talking to a king at some point, and the king was like, "Who are you, Buddha? Look at my life and look how grand it is. Why would I ever sort of want to be like anyone but me?" And the Buddha said, "Oh, king, like your world is very beautiful, but who would be more happy? I am able to sit under a tree without food or drink, without any ill. There was something about without feeling any like whiff of illness, ill will, ill heart, suffering. Like for 1 week without food or drink, could the king do that? And he was just like, no, I couldn't do that. And so there's something in there that the Buddha would be experiencing hunger, but there would be no frustration with reality, with the world that it was appearing in front of him, that there would be full reception of that. And I would like to imagine that his world would be teeming with hungry ghosts, and he would be teaching, and celestial beings would be raining down compassion and kindness. Like there would be a certain kind of response that would happen with all that phenomena, and with those those energies moving through his psychic and bodily being and soul being, but that it wouldn't ever stray into this realm of suffering and craving. So that's nice to imagine that that's possible. Does that further your
It's helpful.
imagination?
Yeah, I mean,
Cool,
I'm
people
I'm
are
gonna
jumping
continue to
in.
think
Yeah.
about it, but yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we were James and then Ken.
Yeah, I think that gets wrapped up in that one aphorism, like, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Exactly, totally. That's the difference between suffering and difficulty. That we can have difficulty, and this is also an amazing, I think a way we see teachers in the world, beings who are, you can tell, being like, wow, they're lifting an immense weight, of some kind, but their heart, they're upright in that weight. And I mean, in fact, that's what drew me to Ejo here as a teacher. When it sort of like clicked for me, I was like, that man is up, like sitting quietly in this hall at 5 o'clock every day, and then is just waltzing around, having a family, teaching school, like teaching classes at night, having children, like dealing with crises. And he's like sleeping way less than I am, like, and has so little control, but is also happier than I am. It's just like this kind of totally wild alchemy of being that this, I think, is exact point that is so important. That there are also these stories of the Buddhas walking, and one that I really remembered or resonated with me was a young cowherd was there, and he just asked them, so I could just come with you? And the Buddha said, yes, come, monk. And he just sort of like, handed his stick to someone else, and he didn't have any family, and he just went. And I think actually that moment, that's a moment I think we actually all get to experience in this life. Maybe not in that level, and maybe we never see a corporeal Buddha, but our images of that awakening strike us, I think, nonetheless, of these beings who seem to move with an ease that is just supernatural. Ken, you want to jump in?
Yeah, to Don's question, this is maybe an imperfect analogy, but I think about the philosophy of Yorke ceremony and how what seemed to be embodied in that somewhat at least is knowing how much is enough. And it's written almost explicitly into the universe too.
Yeah. So what Ken's talking about there is, he said the word oryoki. That's Japanese for, it means the vessels of the perfect amount. And so for any of you who have eaten a retreat here, come to breakfast, which you're all welcome actually. You can ask me more about that afterwards. There's a ritualized meal ceremony that's done in the Japanese Soto that we also do here and during retreats. But yeah, may all this food be for my awakening. And then there's also you're served together, and your bowls are open, and you lay them out, and you close them together. I think there's something about that like not changing the shape of the vessel, just receiving whatever comes. I think that's something in this place that we're talking about or looking at, the kind of, I guess I mean the image of the empty bowl that the Buddha walked around and said, will you feed me? And just received that and didn't do any further cultivation of what he would receive. Does that speak to your point? Do you want to say anything further about it?
I think for anyone who hasn't participated in that, you should, because of the experience of it and how that it seems to become really manifest when you're in the midst of it.
Thank you. Oh, we're just at time. I think we'll call it there. Well, next class we'll spend some time talking about nirvana. It was great. I hope we've been talking about nirvana the whole time, actually. And then we'll also talk more about the Eightfold Path, and then start talking about the 6 perfections, the form of path that we most often talk about in this school. Okay.
This and all our teachings are offered free of charge. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at buddhaeye.org and click the donate button at the top of the page. Thanks.